So what dynamic creative is the ability to have creative be responsive to the audience on the fly, which is otherwise to say, to make sure that each person sees a message and an ad that is most relevant to them. That's really important because relevance equates to attention. And we're in a world that has fundamentally changed from the history of how advertising worked. It used to be that advertising was created to run on a TV screen for a consumer who was leaned back and consuming that content. And generally speaking, was pretty focused on the content on that screen. But the world changed in July of 2007 with the invention of the iPhone. Today, all of us walk around with phones in our hands pretty much all the time. And that means that the way that we consume content and the advertising embedded in it has fundamentally changed. We are now multitasking all the time. We're consuming ads when we're standing in line at the grocery store and we're scrolling through our feed while we're waiting. And even when we are in front of the TV sitting on our couch at home, we probably have our phone in our hand and our laptop or tablet in our lap and are multitasking across multiple screens. And the human brain has built some functions to allow us to do that. We can multitask because our brains are fantastic at filtering out information that is not relevant to us or relevant to the task that we're doing. And so when we're distracted in line at the grocery store or multitasking, a lot of the ads that go before our eyes are never seen by our brains because our brains are actively filtering that stuff out, going, not relevant for you, don't pay attention to it. But personalization and the dynamic creative that allows it cuts through those mental filters by creating a moment of relevance that your brain keys in on and says, oh, this is for me, I need to pay attention to it. And so what we found in research from our clients is that personalizing the ads and creating that dynamic relevance in the moment for the user makes the ads capture attention. And with capturing attention, the effectiveness is greatly improved.
How are you measuring that effectiveness? Because there's the famous phrase, right? Like, I don't know. There's the thought that you can spend media, you can create campaigns, but you don't know that they're effective. And everyone has shiny new things. How are you determining that dynamic creative with sort of personalization is more effective?
So we know that dynamic creative is more effective in a number of ways. For certain of our clients, we can capture the conversion events. If you're signing up for something online, we have the data of which ads you responded to. It's really simple and straightforward to be able to say, oh, more people responded to the personalized ads than to the non-personalized ads. But in other categories where we don't have the direct connection to the sale, like in consumer packaged goods, we have to rely on our clients doing the research. And luckily, all of our big customers have done that work. So our big CPG clients, for example, will tie the online ad campaigns to shopper card data and actually look at, were the people who were exposed to the dynamic campaign, did they buy more in the store at retail than the people who were exposed to a control campaign or a non-dynamic campaign? And the results are consistently client after client after client. The answer is yes. The response to actual sale is dramatically increased by the dynamic campaigns. And when I say dramatically, I'm not talking 10% or 15%, but, and these are real brand studies. I can't quote the companies, but big billion-dollar brands. One is a 50% lift. One is an 80% lift. One was 150% lift. One was a 700% lift in effectiveness versus non-dynamic campaigns. And for these advertisers, this is meaningful economic return, because if you're spending $100 million in media spend and you can get that creative to perform 50% better, that's $50 million in created value. It's a massive, massive economic opportunity for advertisers. And that's why the largest advertisers in the world have committed to personalizing their ads and connecting to customers.
So I suspect that there is a lot of amazing technology involved in personalization, in measuring the effectiveness of dynamic creative in just the entire process. But we are here at the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity, and there's the word creative in dynamic creative. What do you think about how the personalization process sort of shifts the process of creating great campaigns?
So there are a couple of elements that go into creating a great dynamic campaign, because at the end of the day, it's great advertising that connects with consumers that is what we're after. Sometimes you don't need personalization for that. So personalization and the dynamic creative is a tool in the toolbox, if you will. But like any tool, you need to know how to use the tool effectively. So one of the first things that we talk about is, okay, there's a technical aspect in that the mechanics of how we accomplish the personalization is a little different in the open web than it is in social. It's a little different for video than display because the technology platforms are different. But from a creative process standpoint, people get way too hung up and distracted by the technology. We can do the implementation, don't worry about that. You need to focus on the creative development process and get the creative right. And we'll worry about how that gets implemented in the various technical environments. So the first thing that you realize is the classic process of creative development starts with a creative brief, where historically you'd say, what's your singular target audience and what's the one key message that you want them to take away from your advertising? Well, that can't be your starting point anymore in a world where we have dynamic personalization. We have lots of potential audiences to speak to with lots of different messages. So the whole process of creating the brief and how you brief your creative agency is different for a dynamic campaign. The creative agency now needs to understand what we call message audiences. And let me give you an example. Your media audience might be women 25 to 34 years old. But your message audiences could be quite more specific within that. For example, well, are we speaking to moms? Okay, great, we're speaking to moms. So we may want to, within women 25 to 54, we want to speak to moms differently than non-moms. And then, okay, if we're speaking to moms, would we speak differently to a working mom versus a stay-at-home mom? Well, now you can go a level deeper. If I'm speaking to a working mom, do I want to speak to her different during the work week than I speak to her on the weekends? Because the way that I express the value proposition of my product and how I relate to that person as a human being can be very different based on even the day of week or the time of day that it is. So we have to think about the various messaging audiences and make sure that our creative agency understands who those various personas and circumstances are.
So that sounds amazing, but is it scalable? And how does your org help the creative agencies in the, sort of adapt to this process?
Yes. So it is more work in order to scale it, but that's where technology comes in, right? So now you have tools to make that challenge much easier. So for flash talking, now part of Mediaocean, we have what we call a strategy mapper that helps the creative agency, the media agency, and the client all get on the same page in terms of who these audiences are and mapping that out as a visual flow chart. So now the client can make sure that both agencies, the media agency and the creative agency who have to work together on this campaign, have the same starting foundation. So that's step one, and there's a tool to help do that. The next step is to say, well, what data triggers do I have that let me know who this customer is so that I can figure out what creative I should show? So within our tool, we have all of the data sources, and the rules that run on that data are part of the tool. So as you start to build out the logic, you drag a piece of data or you drag a decision rule onto the canvas, and the technology then propagates your options as you add each thing. So like anything else that's complicated, You break it down into its component parts and you try to automate as much as you can. So that's how the technology on the planning side, but now you have to create all the versions. And it's not unusual in a dynamic campaign. We're not talking about 20 or 30 or 100 different creative versions. It could be 30 or 40,000 individual creative versions. Well, you have to automate that process too. And so if you have your assets, your various visuals and various backgrounds and various copy lines, all you have to do is press one button and the software will create all of the combinations of your assets to create all of the versions automatically. So no creative staff has to spend time doing that. The software knows how to do that. And then you just have to put the pieces together. I have my logic in terms of my personas and my data and what I want to say, and then I just map the creative against that. So there is more work, but it's not as overwhelming as you would think if you have the right tools and process to do it.